Hello students and welcome to another video. Today we are looking specifically at real life prose essays that were done. Going to give some feedback on them, looking specifically at the thesis statements for these prose essays. So let's get started. So I need to start off by describing the three elements that the AP readers are looking at for your prose essays. And this comes directly from the AP Classroom website, and it starts off with thesis. Number two, then you're graded on the evidence and commentary. And this is the biggest part of your essay. This is worth the most amount of points overall. And then finally, you have sophistication. And so we'll go over all of these at a different time, but today we're just focusing on the thesis statements. So I want to start by giving you the prompt that was answered. So it says, carefully read the following excerpt from William Dean Howell's novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham. Then, in a well-constructed essay, analyze how the author portrays the complex experience of two sisters, Penelope and Irene, within their family and society. You may wish to consider such literary elements as style, tone, and selection of detail. Now, you need to understand the prompt first. You need to break down what the prompt is actually saying. Obviously, that second sentence is the most important. You are analyzing the complex experience between these two sisters and how they relate to their family and also how they relate to society. So you need to analyze that in depth, and your whole response needs to be focused on that. Now that we know what the prompt is, we need to start off looking at what a thesis statement has to include according to the AP Classroom website. So in order to get that point, really the only criteria is it needs to be a defensible interpretation. Nothing else. Now before you start saying, oh, that's pretty easy, this one point encompasses two different aspects. On the one hand, you have it has to be defensible, which means it does have to be a bit of an argument. It needs to be a legitimate claim that you're making on the text that can be defended. But then the second aspect is it needs to be an interpretation. It cannot be a summary. It cannot be a description. It cannot be something general. So with that in mind, here's what they say you should not do, or how you do not get the credit for having a thesis statement. Number one, do not restate the prompt. William Dean Howell's novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham, illustrates the complex experience of Penelope and Irene in consideration of their family and society. Number two, you do not want to have a generalized comment. William Dean Howell's novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham, illustrates and describes how everybody is different in their own way. And number three, you do not just want to describe the passage. In The Rise of Silas Lapham, author William Dean Howells shows that two sisters, Penelope and Irene, have different relationships between family and society. And now that we know what not to do, let's look at some good examples. The first good example, the thesis statement, is that both sisters struggle to find an identity apart from their families, showcased through Howell's portrayal of the parent. This isn't the greatest example in the world, but it does score the point because it does not restate the prompt, it does not merely give a description, and it is a little bit more in depth. Now you can do more with this, you can make this a lot stronger. They are giving a defensible claim that both sisters are together struggling with an identity that is separate from their families, and how does that happen? It's through Howell's portrayal of the parents. So that's actually an interesting argument because you're taking the focus of the two sisters and you're saying that they are struggling to find their identity apart from their family's identity, and the way that the author shows this struggle and this conflict is through their description and characterization of the parents. Good example number two. By using certain details to allude to the perfect woman of his time and indicate a sense of selflessness within the two sisters, Howell creates a new woman who cares less about her looks and more about those around her. This is an excellent example because not only is the length a little bit more indicative of a full-scale essay, but you're bringing in aspects of gender and literary theory into this, but you also have a complex sentence here that is pretty deep. It is not restating the prompt. It is much better than a generalized comment, and you're actually saying something that's a defensible interpretation. By the certain details are alluding to this idea of a perfect woman, and Through these sisters, you're almost creating, the author that is, a new woman who cares less about how she looks and more about those around her. So you have to argue for that within the text. And good example number 3. Howell creates a complex experience through his family by showing the clear contrasts in characters that helps to define that families are shaped by each person's difference in personality. Now, this is a good example because, again, it is not merely restating, it is not merely giving a description. Yes, this thesis statement does need work to be a bit stronger, but ultimately, I awarded the point because it is a defensible interpretation. It does need to be a bit stronger to be exemplary, but it is at this good level. It is right in between being great and being bad. So it's right in the middle. This is an average thesis statement that would be awarded the point. Now, if I were to rank all 3, the first and best thesis statement out of all of these that I would say go above and beyond just merely getting the point, but are setting this person up for a great essay, is that one right over there. The one about by using certain details to allude to the perfect woman. Now, I really like that, and notice some of the differences, even in the structure of it, than the others. It is a clear thesis statement that you know this is what the person's trying to define. It is an in-depth argument that's being created. It shows sophistication in writing, but also in thought. This is a thoughtful thesis statement. I mean, when you look at that, you're saying this is college-level writing. This is something that this person really took to the next level. If I was to rank the other ones as well, the one that I think needs the most work is the one on the bottom there, because it is very borderline restating the prompt, especially starting off with how it creates a complex experience. Plus, it's a little bit vague down at the bottom and maybe a little bit general by saying that it's helping to define that families are shaped by persons' difference in personality. It's a little bit obvious, it's a little bit vague, it's a little bit generic. So I would like to see this a little bit stronger, but ultimately I do think that this is more so good than it is bad. And then the one in the middle of the pack would be that both sisters struggle to find an identity. I do wish this was rephrased a bit because I think that this has the potential of being an excellent thesis statement. But ultimately, how it is right now, it's a little too simple. It just feels like it's missing something. But again, all of these are good, some more than others, but this is what you want to do when you're writing yours. You need a defensible interpretation. You cannot just restate the prompt. Now, here's a couple examples of thesis statements that need a little bit of work. Now, they have some good in them, but in order to make it and get that point that they need for the essay, they do need to rephrase it, or they need to come off with a stronger, more defensible interpretation. So let's look at the top one. From a passage of The Rise of Silence Latham, William Dean Howell portrays the two sisters Irene and Penelope as independent in society at large, yet dependent on their family. He expresses this through diction and tone to cause us to question why we so desperately seek the acceptance of others. Now, there are some good ideas on this. I really like that this author is able to say that the sisters want to be independent in society, but yet at the same time they are dependent on their family, and that the author shows this relationship through literary devices. That is excellent because that's what the prompt wants you to do. Now, some ways that it needs work is you do want to avoid personal pronouns. This person does use terms like we to bring ourselves into this essay. You want to avoid that in academic writing, but also it just feels like too much of a description of the prompt and of the actual text, especially that first sentence. Most of it isn't really saying much. It's just saying that the text is portraying two sisters as they are struggling with independence versus being dependent on their family. But the prompt already tells us that for the most part. Now, secondly, when you bring in the literary elements, sometimes when you list them like this, it just feels like you're doing just that. You're listing, almost like a three-pronged thesis. Now, I do like that the second half of the second sentence there is bringing up a thematic element of questioning why we so desperately seek the acceptance of others, but it needs to be more sophisticated. It needs to be written differently, and you really should combine this and try to have one succinct sentence if you can. It's easier for the readers to pick out. Now, as an aside, if you ever are talking about diction, you never just want to say diction, because diction means word choice. And so if you say that the author expresses this through diction, you're really just saying the author expresses this through word choice. But that's obvious because every author always expresses something through word choice. So you always have to clarify what kind of diction it is. And it's the same thing with tone. Every passage is going to have a tone, but you need to identify what kind of tone it is. It is not enough to just leave these words and these literary elements isolated by themselves. They need to be clarified with an adjective before it. So is it formal diction? Is it elevated diction? Is it a sad or happy tone, right? Come up with academic words to actually describe the literary devices you're talking about. Now, this second example that needs some work says Howell's portrayal of the two sisters shows the contrast, difference between their two personalities in a seemingly one-minded type of society where all women are called to think and act the same way. Now, again, this is very descriptive of what the text is actually telling us. Plus, there's a part of restating the prompt here, especially in that first part. I do think this needs to be rephrased a bit, and ultimately, I'm not quite sure what the argument is here because all it's telling me is that Howell, the author, is portraying two sisters to show their personalities in a society that's a little bit different. But that is what the text is actually telling us. Where is the defensible interpretation? So ultimately, you need to remember when you're giving a thesis statement, you need it to be, yes, well written, but more than anything, your idea needs to be deep. Your idea needs to be a defensible interpretation. You cannot sound like you're summarizing, and you cannot sound like you're giving a general or generic argument. It needs to be something unique and original that you're creating that's actually enticing to read. And just keep in mind that you do not want to restate the prompt, you do not want to give a generalized comment, and you do not want to just describe the passage. If you avoid these things and you do the defensible interpretation, the AP readers will award you credit for your thesis statement, and it will set you up for success for the rest of your essay. So there you have it. There is reviewing some thesis statements for the AP Literature Prose essay. I hope it helps, and I hope it leads you to success on your future endeavors in AP Literature.